Let me share something that took me years to understand, and maybe it can save you some of that time. Most of us grow up believing that if we work hard, stay honest, and live within our means, eventually life will reward us. Maybe not with luxury, but at least with comfort. A home that feels safe, a job that feels stable, a future that feels planned. But here's what I've learned the hard way. You can do everything right and still find yourself stuck. Because the system we live in doesn't reward effort alone, it rewards ownership. And the truth is, most of us don't own anything. That's the part no one teaches in school. And that's why so many of us, even as we get older, feel like we're running, but not really getting anywhere. Let's talk about that next. The financial loop. Have you ever looked around and wondered who actually wins in this system? If you look closely at the wealthiest 1% in the world, you'll find that regardless of their background or personality, they all tend to fall into one of a few clear categories. Some of them own businesses. Some have invested wisely and built portfolios that pay them even when they sleep. A smaller portion inherited wealth and simply learned how to keep it. Others possess rare skills like creative, athletic, or technical skills that give them leverage very few people have. But beyond their differences, they all share one invisible but powerful thing in common. They own something. They don't just work for money, they own systems, they own products, they own shares in something valuable or have built a reputation that turns their time into something people will pay a premium for. And that ownership, whether it's a company, an idea, or a unique ability, is what builds real wealth. But for ordinary people like us, life often follows the same rhythm. We wake up, we go to work, we get paid. Then we spend that paycheck on bills, rent, transportation, food, and a few small comforts to get us through the stress. If there's anything left, it disappears almost without us noticing. Then we wait for the next paycheck, and we do it all over again. At first, this doesn't feel wrong. It feels reasonable. Everyone around us is doing the same thing. We think, well, this is just how adult life works. But over time, that cycle begins to feel heavier, more draining, more permanent. Years ago, I had a decent job and no major expenses. I wasn't reckless with my money. I didn't live above my means, and I never once thought of myself as someone who was financially irresponsible. But I was always tired. I was always slightly anxious about the end of the month, and after nearly 5 years of working, I had nothing to show for it. Not a safety net, not an asset, not even a consistent habit of saving. What finally helped me begin to step out of that loop was a simple idea, a way of managing the money I already had with more clarity and intention. It's called the 25-50-15-10 rule. And in the next part, I'll show you how that first 25% can quietly start creating something of your own. The 25% for freedom, letting money work for us. Take 25% of your income each month and set it aside, not for spending, not even for saving in the traditional sense, but for growing. And by growing, I don't just mean money. I mean options, skills, leverage, and time. For me, this shift began with a question. If I don't want to be stuck forever trading time for money, then what can I start building now that might work for me in the background? That's when I began looking at assets, things that can increase in value over time or create income even when I'm not actively working. And assets don't have to be complicated or out of reach. Some of the simplest, most accessible forms include index funds, which allow you to own a slice of the entire market and grow your money slowly, consistently, over time. High-income skills, things like writing, video editing, coding, public speaking, or marketing. Any ability that gives you the power to earn independently of a single employer. Online businesses, such as selling digital products, offering services, or building communities around a niche you care about. In the beginning, it's completely normal to feel unsure about where to start. Not everybody has the background or confidence to dive into big investments or build a business overnight. But that 25% doesn't have to fund a startup. It could go towards something as simple as a short course, a useful tool, or a small freelance project that tests a new skill. What matters most is that it's done consistently. Because consistency over time is what creates compound growth. Every dollar invested, every new skill learned, every small win, it all starts to stack on top of each other. There's a story that still inspires me. Shaquille O'Neal, known to the world as one of the greatest basketball players of all time, quietly turned his NBA earnings into a business empire. Instead of spending it all on image or luxury, he invested early into companies like Google and Ring, long before they became household names. He understood that true freedom comes not from spending what you make, but from owning what grows without you. And that's the difference. When we spend, money disappears. When we plant it in the right place, it starts to grow. 15% for stability. The next 15% is what keeps us in the game, especially when life doesn't go as planned. We often think of emergency savings as something optional, something we'll build when things settle down. But the truth is, the world rarely gives us that kind of perfect timing. Life shows up unannounced. It doesn't ask if it's convenient. A few years ago, a friend of mine was working freelance for a company that had been her main source of income for over 2 years. Everything felt steady, professional, and safe. Then out of nowhere, she got an email. The company was restructuring and had to pause all outsourced contracts. Overnight, 80% of her income vanished, and she didn't have a financial buffer to fall back on. It took her months to rebuild. Not just the money, but the mental space to feel stable again. That's why this 15% isn't a backup plan, it's part of the main plan. A quiet reserve that says, whatever happens next, I won't fall all the way down. Ideally, it should cover around 5 months of core expenses, things like rent or mortgage, groceries, basic utilities, and transport. And it needs to live somewhere safe. A high-yield savings account with easy access and zero risk is far better than chasing returns. This isn't money to grow, it's money to protect. 50% for living, spending wisely. This 50% goes toward everyday living, covering essentials like food, transport, rent, and other basic needs. But somewhere along the way, what we need and what we've been made to want slowly blend into one another. We buy things to reward ourselves after long days. We say yes to upgrades because everyone else around us seems to. We sign up for services we barely use simply because they're just a few dollars a month. Over time, these choices stop feeling like choices. They become the background rhythm of how we live, comfortable, convenient, and automatic. And that's the risk. Not that we spend too much at once, but that we spend too often without noticing. So how do we know if something truly belongs in our 50%? Here's a quick checklist to keep us grounded. Does this help me live, stay healthy, or do my work? Would I still pay for this if I lost half my income tomorrow? Is this supporting my peace, or just filling a moment of boredom or stress? Would I buy this again if I had to make the same decision twice? 10% for joy. When we talk about managing money, most conversations focus on growth, protection, and discipline, but very few mention joy. As if joy is something we can afford to postpone until everything else is finished. But life doesn't wait, and neither does our energy, our relationships, or the quiet corners of ourselves that need to be refilled. This final 10% is the part that reminds us what all of this effort is really for. It's the short trip that clears your head after months of routine. It's the gift you choose thoughtfully for someone who means more than words can say. It's the ticket to a concert you've waited years to attend. It's a quiet meal in a place that makes you feel at peace. These are reminders that life is not just about building, but also about being able to feel joy while we build. Years ago, after months of nonstop work, I booked a short stay by the sea. Not because it was the smartest use of my budget, but because I was starting to forget what clear thinking even felt like. I returned lighter, not just in spirit, but in focus. The goals didn't change, but my ability to carry them did. These moments cost money, but they also give back something that no investment account can, simply because it gives us the strength to continue. Long-term thinking. For a long time, most of us manage money the same way we manage our to-do lists, just trying to make it to the end of the week. We think in short bursts, this month's rent, next month's bills, a trip we might squeeze in if there's anything left. It's not wrong. In fact, it makes perfect sense when life feels unpredictable. Planning further ahead feels like a luxury we can't afford. But over time, I began to notice something. The people who seemed calm were usually the ones who thought in longer timelines. They weren't trying to be rich tomorrow. They were slowly building a life that would give them freedom later. And it wasn't some grand strategy, it was simple things, done consistently. Like setting aside a fixed amount every month into an investment account, even when it felt small, even when no one else was doing it. Letting time and compound growth do their quiet work in the background. Then slowly building skills, writing, design, negotiation, or something they could do after hours. And when income began to grow, they didn't expand their lifestyle right away. They expanded their margin. That's the truth about long-term thinking. It shows up in small decisions that repeat often, and in the clarity that comes from knowing every step is part of something larger. The life we imagine for ourselves in 10 or 20 years doesn't appear out of nowhere. It begins here, in the way we spend, the skills we learn, and the patience to stay on a path that doesn't always feel fast, but always moves forward. If there's one thing to take away from all of this, it's that we don't need dramatic changes to build a different life. What we need is direction, and a quiet commitment to keep moving in it. Every choice counts, not because it's big, but because it adds up. A few dollars set aside, a skill practiced after work, a question asked before clicking buy. That's how it begins. If this video gave you something useful, then hit like. And if you want more content like this, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for being here. Truly.